So I've already talked about this a little bit on my channel, but in 2021, I am planning on getting to more indie published books. Obviously not that I have anything against popular books, because I read a lot of them. I love them. I have videos talking about how I think that popular books are awesome, and it's cool when everybody can talk about the same thing. But there is a lot of books that don't get a lot of recognition that are just flipping amazing. In November, the Patreon buddy read that won the poll for what book to buddy read that month was The Sword of Kaigen. This is a book that's been on my radar ever since Daniel Green reviewed it almost exactly 11 months ago, and I was excited to get a hold of it. It's a Japanese-inspired fantasy with a magic system that harkens back to an elemental system similar to like Avatar: The Last Airbender. I still haven't watched it, so get off my case. And like I said, I was excited to get to this book, but then we started it, and I have to admit that Rhythm of War took over a little bit of my reading life. But I had a really hard time with the beginning of this book because it starts off extremely exposition heavy, kind of slow. And honestly, if you've watched any of my video reviews in the past, that normally doesn't bother me, but for some reason, in The Sword of Kaigen, I had a really hard time getting attached to the characters, caring too much about the world. It was a little bit familiar, interesting. It wasn't bad, but it was like a solid 3-star. And then after I got into the hype of reading other books, and then I took a break, I was in a little bit of a hangover, and I struggled to get back into this one. But because it was the buddy read in my Discord, I needed to read Sword of Kaigen. So I pushed on through. And I have never changed my mind about a book so hard, from going from meh to this is one of my favorite books that I've read in a very long time. I've never had that happen the way that this has happened with Sword of Kaigen this month. Because as slow and like exposition-y as the front part of this book is, around the 31% mark, I read the ebook of this book, it gets wild. And the action in this book is top notch. Like it's amazing. The magic system is awesome, even though it's not like super hard the way like a Sanderson's magic system is. It's really cool, and the way that it's incorporated into action and the way that the action is written is amazing. Wong is an incredible action writer, which if you had showed me the beginning of this book, I never would have thought that's the case, just because it seemed like it was a little bit meandery. But holy crap, it gets fast and it gets brutal, and it is so cool. And then the book takes some extremely bold choices, both in storytelling, character development, and pacing, that I just haven't ever experienced in reading all the fantasy that I've been reading lately. There's a lot of very intentional choices with ways to flip things on their head, subvert expectations, and hit you right in the gut in a way that I think a lot of books are afraid to do. Which is to say that this book has a lot of very dark things that happen in it. It's very gruesome, and it can be hard to read at times. In fact, at one point while reading this book, it hit me so hard that I had to put it down because it was just too much. That doesn't mean that it's overly explicit, it just means that it's rough to read. Things happen that normally aren't allowed to happen in stories. But because of it, I think it sort of elevates itself to a height that a lot of fantasy books that I've been reading lately just don't even attempt. And on top of that, it deals with a lot of hard subject matter in a way that is so much more nuanced than I ever thought it might be, and actually handled incredibly well, to the point where I was literally like in my brain cheering for parts of this book, and I was blown away by the fact that it delivered amazing twists and turns and conclusions to these plot arcs that I never would have expected. But once I got them, they've become some of my favorite things. In a year when I've read some amazing books, including the Stormlight Archive and the Farseer trilogy, Sword of Kaigen is in the running for my favorite books that I've read this year because of how wonderfully mature it handles some of these crazy topics. The author is younger than me, but I feel like she was able to maneuver around some extremely difficult and I keep saying brutal and mature subject matter in a way that is so nuanced and beautiful. And like I said, when I say mature, I mean like it's handled wisely and oh dang, it's good. So I would say pick up this book if you were looking for something a little bit different than normal. It's not European, it's a Japanese inspired fantasy. It takes a lot of weird turns. It experiments with pacing in ways that I don't normally see. I believe that it is now the book that contains my favorite female character in fantasy. It contains some of the highlights in my fantasy reading this year that will probably stick with me for a very long time. Honestly, I am desperate to read anything else by this author. She has another series that this sort of serves as a standalone prequel to, but she's kind of put that on indefinite hiatus, so I'm just desperately looking for her to write something else because of how magnificently I think she handles elements of this book. But as much as I love this book, I want to make sure that people don't have their expectations set too high. First of all, as I mentioned, I think that potentially the pacing at the beginning of this book could be a little bit jarring. And while I said the pacing at the beginning could be jarring, I've already said this in the review, I don't want to repeat myself too much. It's very much an atypical form of storytelling where it's slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. And there is like a longer section of falling action in this book than I maybe have ever seen, but it's handled in such a powerful and awesome way that to me, it really didn't matter. Honestly, once I hit the go point, I never stopped loving this book. I thought that there was parts that I was going to hate, and instead they were flipped on their head, and I ended up just, dang, it's so good. The ending sort of doesn't work for everybody because there's some interesting choices with the way that the story is told, with the emphasis that we get at different points on different characters and different parts of the story that's being told. And the way the book ends is very much to make sure that it was tied into this other series. But honestly, even if I didn't know that series existed, I sort of loved the way that it ended, though I can understand how if this was a published book and it wasn't tied to another series, it might have gotten changed. That being said, it didn't bother me in the slightest. The only thing that actually affected me was the slower beginning, but I am obviously so glad that I pushed through. This is a book that I've seen get some extremely high praise, and now I think that it's totally deserved, but honestly, I think this book is still underrated. More people need to read it because it's that good. It was that surprising to me. I do have friends with which the problems that I mentioned hit them harder and it bothered them more. So your mileage may vary, but honestly, this book has really positive ratings on Goodreads for a reason. I think it works for a lot of people, and I think that even if it doesn't necessarily hit as hard throughout for everybody, the parts that are the best are incredible. If this book is not already on your radar, I hope that this helps put it there, and if this book has been on your TBR for a while, I strongly recommend that you pick it up. Worth noting, if you have Kindle Unlimited, it is available for free with that service. I've already mentioned this once, but I want to make sure that I mention it again. I am desperately looking forward to anything this author puts out in the future. And I'm so glad that this book has gotten the recognition that it has already gotten. Like I said, I want to make sure to shine a spotlight on it so it can get even more praise, which I think it totally deserves. If you have read this book, please comment down below with your thoughts. Make sure that if you're talking about spoilers, you hit enter a few times so that YouTube kind of hides it below that read more tag. If this book didn't work for you as much as it did for me, please let me know down below because I think that opinion is valid as well. What are some other independently published books that you think are awesome that I haven't talked about on this channel or you don't think is getting enough love? Please comment that down below because I'd like to review more of those. If you'd like to talk about this book or anything else with me more, please check out the link for the Discord down below. It's available for everybody. If you'd like to support this channel financially, there's a Patreon link down below as well as a merch store with some dumb t-shirts that I made. If you'd like to see more video reviews from me in the future, please remember to hit the subscribe button. If you hit that bell, you'll get notified every time I post a new video. But thank you so much for watching. YouTube has been such a fun experience for me. I hope to see you again soon. Have a good one.
No one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep. No one ever get enough. If it don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep. No one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep. No one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.